Hello everyone, it is Samantha and I hope you guys are having a great day today. I'm here today to talk about some of my favorite fantasy series that I have read since I have been on hiatus. I have been gone for over a year and a half and I have actually read quite a bit this past year. Didn't last year, but this year I have. And so I thought I would share with you guys some of my new favorites that I have never mentioned on this channel before. So without further ado, let's get into my favorite fantasy series from the last couple of years. The first trilogy that I'm going to talk about is a completed fantasy trilogy. The last book just came out, so if you're looking to pick this up, no waiting, all the books are out, and that is the Untitled Trilogy by R.J. Barker. I picked up the first book, which is The Bone Ships, last summer, and I immediately fell in love with this series. It is a very fresh fantasy world. It's centered around ships, so there's a lot of ship battles, there's a lot of nautical type of fantasy going on here, but it's very unique, and he takes his own take on that trope in fantasy. And I also happen to really enjoy seafaring fantasy stories. The Live Ship Traders trilogy by Hobb is my favorite trilogy by her, and the Indus series by Sherwood Smith, also a good chunk of those books take place at sea, and so I find them really fascinating and I really enjoy them. But this one takes out those tropes and turns it into something new. He uses new terms, like instead of captain, they're called shipwives, and instead of walking a deck, you're walking the slate, because these ships are literally created from bones. They're created from the bones of these ancient sea dragons that no longer exist, and has allowed these people to basically flourish. It's how they wage war, because they live on these islands. It's how they trade, everything. So like these bone ships are their livelihood. And it's a very harsh culture. So if you are a parent and you have your firstborn child and it's born completely perfect, then you have to like sacrifice it to the ships, and it causes these like wane lights, they're called, to go up into the masts. And if you are injured or malformed in any way, you're basically called a burn cast. You're cast to the lowest levels of society. So if you lose a leg, for example, you have to become a cobbler. So it's a very harsh reality for these people. And almost every single ship and the country itself are ruled by women. So there's a lot of really great, like, powerful female characters in this story. And I ended up really enjoying it. The story itself centers around those who are on the black ships. So the black ships are bone ships that have been painted black, and it's basically where somebody's sentenced to death, they are sent to the bone ship. And they are forced to live out their sentence on this ship until they die. And they have to do different tasks and things, like, oh, they'll be told to go and fight in a war or something like that. So our follows Joran, who has kind of been unfairly accused. He was basically forced to fight a duel with a higher up person's son, and he ended up accidentally killing him, and he's been sent to the bone ships. And at the same time, one of the most famous shipwives has also been punished, Maze, and she is being sent to the black ships as well. And so the two of them end up kind of teaming up and uncovering all of the secrets of this world, like what actually happened to these sea dragons and what it means, and like what intrigues are going on in this society. And I really, really, really like it. It is one of my new favorite fantasy series, and each book was like 4.5 stars for me. The last book really finished out the series really well, and it made me cry a little bit, which is pretty rare for books, and I don't think I've cried since I've read Robin Hobb. So definitely really, really, really good books that I recommend checking out. The next trilogy that I want to talk about is another one that is completely finished as well, and as that is the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chackraborty, which consists of the City of Brass, the Kingdom of Copper, and the Empire of Gold. I actually read this one shortly before my hiatus, the first one, but then I never finished it. I just finished it last month, and it's a new favorite. I absolutely love it. The story centers around Middle Eastern mythologies, and so it focuses on the jinn, and it follows our main character of Nari, who's growing up in about 1700s, but during the Napoleonic era, Cairo. And she's always had these strange healing abilities that she tries to keep quiet. She's never been able to explain it. She also has this ability to understand languages. Well, one day she accidentally summons an ancient jinn warrior who takes her to the city of the Devas, and this is where she finds out her heritage and what she actually is. There's a lot of court intrigue, a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of Middle Eastern and even some Asian mythologies that are in here. Most of the people in the Deva society are Muslim, so there's a lot of different mythologies and histories and things that are included in this series, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's like a fresh fantasy story, because you don't actually read that many fantasy stories that take place in the Middle East, and I really enjoyed it, and it made for a really good summer read. I really love the main character of Nari. She's just a very strong character who's willing to fight for what she believes in and to kind of make her own mark on the world and fight against what she feels is wrong, as is the other character we follow, which is Ali, and he is the third son of the king, if you will. So I really enjoyed them. I highly recommend them. And each book for me was, again, like 4 or 5-star reads. The middle one, The Kingdom of Copper, was my favorite, and it was a solid 5 stars. The other two are about 4.5. So this is another one that I really recommend checking out if you haven't already. The next 2 books that I have to talk about are Duology, and it is The Traitor God and The God of Broken Things by Johnston. These books were fantastic. I really enjoyed the god trope in fantasy, you know, where gods kind of meddle within the mortal affairs, and this one kind of took it and made it into something new. It follows our main character of Idrin, who is a mage. He has a very rare ability to be able to control people's minds. He can influence them. He can make them make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make. Just basically do anything he wants to, can take possession of him. And this is an ability that is feared in this world, so he's always had like a tight leash. But when the story is introduced, it's clear that he's escaped from the Guild of Mages, and he's kind of making his own way in the world after something terrible that has happened. So he ends up going back to the city he came from when he finds out his friend that he's kind of linked to was murdered. And so he returns to the place of his birth to kind of figure out what's going on, and he just knows that these like ancient creatures are going to be after him again. They have been the entire time he's been on the run. And so he comes back to the city and he finds out some things are amiss because a god is missing. The gods, all of the gods are missing. And so he ends up diving into the mystery and kind of reestablishing himself and getting ready for an ancient war. And I really, really like this series. Idrin's kind of a morally gray character, and he's kind of humorous, which I enjoy. I like it when characters aren't just like, oh, the chosen hero who's amazing, can do no wrong. I like it when they're kind of morally gray, which he definitely was in these 2 books. So I definitely recommend them. The ending was amazing, and they're only 2 books, so you're not setting yourself up for a large series. I ended up rating both of these 5 stars. I really enjoyed them, and I highly recommend that you check them out. The next couple of series that I want to mention are both by the same author, and that author is Jeff Wheeler. I first encountered Jeff Wheeler's books when I was, I think it was in college, so I've known about him for a long time. It was his Mirrorwood series. I got really into it. And then he kind of fell off my radar until last year when I realized, oh my god, this man publishes like 3 to 4 books a year. Like, he publishes a lot. And the 2 series that I read last year that I really fell in love with, and I'm only going to hold up one of each book from the series because there's a lot of books in these series, is the Harbinger series and the Kingfountain series. So his books are what I like to call fantasy crack. They're not that great, but they're really engrossing, and you can't help but know what's going to happen, and you just want to keep going. You want to keep going, and you don't want to stop, even though you know you could read better books, but you know what? Damn it, they're good, and they're fun reads. That is Jeff Wheeler. Harbinger series takes place in the Mirrorwood universe, and so it takes place like centuries later. So if you read Mirrorwood, you don't have to read any of these in that particular of an order, so you can read both of these simultaneously without having read Mirrorwood, but it does take place, this one does take place in the same world. And it's very Dickensian in style. Like, it follows our main character who's taken from the streets of like this very much factory-driven, harsh city, and she's taken to live in the clouds where like all the rich people live because they live in like these floating islands. Books follow her throughout her life as she gets involved in like political intrigues, and she has a lot of talent, and she puts that talent to use, and she finds her way in the world and gets involved in all of the politics. And the other series, which is the Kingfountain series, are related. So these 2 worlds will cross over from each other, even though they're in 2 different universes. But again, you don't have to read either of these before the other because the series takes place like centuries before the events in this book. So the Kingfountain series is very much more Arthurian based. It's very much based in like the Arthurian legends. You have like your knights, you have your evil kings and your good kings fighting against each other. You have a Merlin character, like a Sword in the Stone kind of a story. I really enjoy them. The Kingfountain series can kind of be broken into like 2 separate series. It's the first one starts with the Queen's Poisoner and ends with the Forsaken Throne, and then the other one actually takes place before the events in this one, but you don't need to read it first, and it starts with Knight's Ransom. And again, I really enjoy them. All of these books are like 3.5, 4-star reads for me, but they're so engrossing, and they're really fast reads. So if you're wanting like a really fast, fun fantasy series, check out Jeff Wheeler because they're really, really good. And I recommend this one, the Harbinger series, before the Kingfountain series because I liked it just a little bit more. So yes, I definitely recommend checking out his books. Again, they're not amazing, but they're fun. The next series I have to show you all is another one that I started before I left, but I finished it while I was gone, and that is the Spellslinger series by Sebastien de Castell. This is his YA fantasy series, so it's separate from the Greatcoats. That actually takes place in another part of the world, a completely separate continent, and it follows our main character of Kellen, who comes from a tribe of mages, essentially, except for he doesn't have power, and that basically ends up making him an outcast. He also finds out he has a disease called the Shadow Black, and so this ends up really enforcing that he's an outcast in this society as he forges his own way in the world. He ends up being accompanied by Farius Parafax, who's an Argossi, who's like a wandering influencer of events, essentially, and also being accompanied by a squirrel cat. It's a creature that's kind of the mix between a cat and a squirrel, big, very foul-tempered, and definitely has sticky fingers. So this kind of merry band of eclectic characters joins together to kind of forge their way through the story. So the story follows Cullen as he finds his way in the world, and figuring out who he wants to be and what he wants to do. I really enjoyed this series. It's also completely done now, so you can read this one going in knowing that all the books are published, and it's going to be made into a television show, which I am very, very excited for. So if you're wanting something that's a little bit more lighthearted, fast-paced reads, a lot of humor, then I would check out the Spellslinger series by Sebastien de Castell. And the last trilogy that I want to talk to you guys about is the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy by Juliet Marillier. If you have watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know I'm a big Juliet Marillier fan. I discovered her books in high school with the Seven Waters series, which I fell in love with. Her books almost always take place in ancient Ireland, and so they're centered around a lot of Irish myths and mythology and lore, which I really enjoy because I love everything about Ireland and its history. And Blackthorn and Grimm is no different. It takes place in ancient Ireland, and it follows our main characters of Blackthorn and Grimm, who have both escaped from a chieftain's prison. This chieftain was very, very cruel and horrible and known for just tormenting his people on his land, and they end up escaping with the help of the Fae, and they end up coming to a new chieftain's land and kind of forging a new life together. So each book, while the main plotline of Blackthorn and Grimm kind of carries on throughout the books, each book itself has a different story that it features. So each one, they're trying to solve a new mystery, and I really enjoy them. So it's like a nice mixture of like fantasy and a mystery book all wrapped into one, and I absolutely adore the characters of Blackthorn and Grimm. And so if you like Irish mythology, Irish stories, Celtic lore, and you like mystery novels, chances are you're probably going to like these books. It's also a finished trilogy, so you can read this one knowing that it is finished, and the story kind of continues on with other characters related to these in the Warrior Bard series, which I'm also really enjoying. But this one is a new favorite. I absolutely love Den of Wolves. This might be my favorite Juliet Marillier book now. And so they're really good fall and winter reads as well. So this is like a great trilogy to pick up right now. All right, guys, those were all of the fantasy series that I have really enjoyed since I've been gone on YouTube. If you have read any of them, I would love to know all of your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all will have a great day. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.